Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be building this West End Shack kit from GCLaser. I'll be painting it with that Model Air wood as the base color. This is kind of a hybrid kit of paper and some thicker cardboard. The paper is what I'm painting now, and it's almost a veneer that just goes on the outside of the kit. Unfortunately, this isn't going to be my best video, as when I was building it, I was just slightly out of frame where I thought I was, even though looking at my test video that I did, I was okay. So I do apologize about that, but hopefully this gets across the building of it okay. This is a pretty easy kit to assemble and build. It took me about 4 hours to do. However, there are a lot of small detail parts to it that are just made out of that veneer paper, which maybe is just slightly thinner than some cardstock. And if you're not careful with it, you end up breaking it or bending them, and it can ruin it. One instance is the door has 3 pieces to it, and one of them is just a little teeny door handle that you can barely see here that I'm putting on, but it can be, bent and ruined if you're not careful. So there are a lot of parts like that that you just need to take your time building. The cardboard piece that is the interior part that I'm working on now is pretty easy to work with. It is about the thickness of some balsa wood and makes it pretty easy to glue. Kit recommends just using some yellow glue, wood glue, and I end up using just the Gorilla wood glue that I had, and it actually worked really well. If I had any extra on there when I pushed the 2 pieces together, I went in and just cleaned it off so that it wasn't really beaded, and then just continued the process of putting the glue on and getting the walls put together. The first steps are, first building the door, and then you go through and actually build the interior part of the shack, or the main structure, that you then place the veneer over. So here is the final wall that I'm attaching. I just included it since it's just slightly different. It's a little offset to where you have a few different glue points to it, and so I figured I'd just hurry and throw this in as an additional to just show putting on that final wall to the inner portion of the building. Once you get the walls put together, I went in and cleaned up the interior just to get rid of any extra glue that was there. I then flipped it over and added a bead of glue around the base of the structure, underneath where you wouldn't be able to see it from the outside. You probably don't need this, but I wanted to be safe than sorry where it was hidden anyway. So I added that to just give it a little bit more stability. Once you get the main structure put together, the next step is to start putting on the veneer of the kit. For me, I just applied the glue with a toothpick, spread it out to be somewhat thin and even, and then placed the veneer on top of it. There is a little laser cut line that makes it easy to just line it up with the base of that. And then I just gently pushed onto it, and then pushed more firmly with the building onto my cutting mat there. There were a couple of times when I moved it on accident, and it was really easy just to remove it and readjust it and get it put back to where it was. In this case, the corner was a little lacking of glue and it was peeling up a little bit, so I just re-pushed it, put it in there. The next steps is putting in the acetate glass for it, and you actually put some of the glue onto the inner part and then just put the acetate onto the back side of the veneer. This is a little tedious, and I didn't show all of it because, as you can see, it didn't really pick it up in the camera, but you just put it in there, and I had to adjust it a little bit and clean off some excess glue that got onto the acetate, but relatively speaking, it was pretty easy. There are window sills that you put in as well, and as it is just that thin paper, if you're not careful, you can bend it and ruin it, so to speak. However, when I was looking back on it, it was made it look like it'd been beat up a little bit, so I stuck with it. Then you put in the roof joist to hold in the roof, and I just liberally put some glue in the little cutouts, and then went back and also put some on the edges of it just to be safe. The next step to the kit is to put on the rest of the window frames that are on the building that go on the outside. So this is me putting them on, and then once you have those applied, the next step is to add the door into the building. You apply it just like you would the window frames, of gluing around the outer piece and then just putting it in. So that's what I did for the door. Once the door was in place, I then used my X-Acto to just clean up some of the glue that had spilled out of the sides. That way, when I went back and touched up paint, it didn't look too bad. The next step is applying the roof and getting that put on. I pre-fit everything to make sure that it would fit, and then just put all the glue around the top of the kit and applied both sides at once. That way I wasn't putting some glue on and then going on to the other half. It just made sense to get everything glued together at once. I then also went through and cleaned up any glue that had come out from the bottom of it. I went through and added some glue to the peak of the roof. I don't think you really need to do that, but I just wanted to, again, be better safe than sorry, and just applied that little bead of glue onto it. Going back to what I said about small detail parts, here is where you attach 3 joists for 2 steps that lead up to the door. The cutout is just wide enough to fit the X-Acto blade in, and then barely to fit the piece of cardstock in that acts as the joist itself. You have to be careful. I did bend one of them a little bit as I was building it, but it worked out in the long run, just made it look like it'd been sitting for a while. Another small part to the kit that was difficult for me with how big my hands are is the generator that goes off to the side. There's 7 of these interior pieces that you glue together, and then 2 end caps that you can see on the cutting mat already. Once you put those together, the little notch, you put part of the veneer in and wrap it around and glue it together as the generator. You can see it in the upper right there, straight up from the glue puddle. However, I didn't get a good view of it once it was done. There's also 2 little stands that it sits on that's just the thin paper again, and I ended up really mangling one, but was able to salvage it and make it look okay once it was put together, and I just glued it to the side of the shack here in a little bit. The shingles are pretty much just like any other paper kit shingles that at least I've done, and that you put one layer on backwards to act as kind of the weather stripping to it. and then you place shingles on top of it, and you just work your way up to the top of the building. There are some laser cutouts to it that where you line up the paper on it, but once you get further up, it just kind of disappears and you have to add 1 or 2 extra sheets to it. The way I did it was I would glue 2 strips onto it and then cut it off, and then just keep working that way up to the top of the roof. For the chimney that comes out of the building, they give you a piece of styrene. You just need to bend a 90-degree angle into it and then put it into the hole of the building that's there. You then also attach a roof strap that goes onto the chimney and then attaches to the base of the roof. I ended up using super glue here to hold the chimney in place better, as it kept wanting to go off of a 90-degree angle, and so I ended up doing that off camera. Here I am attaching the generator piece onto the building itself. Just put some glue on it and then placed it on the side and made sure that it was level once it was put onto my cutting mat. I then took my X-Acto and a toothpick and cleaned out the portion of the hole that goes through the roof that's for either a lightning rod or an antenna. There's actually 2 of them that are here, and I ended up using both of them. Just eyeballed the length that looked good to me and stuck them through. Put a little bead of glue on the bottom of it to go along the building, and then I glued up underneath the roof to hold it in place really well, and that way I knew that it wouldn't come off at any point. Here's showing off some of that fabulous camera work I was talking about. Unfortunately, the rest of the video that I have is just unusable, but luckily I have a couple of pictures. The first 2 are the finished product before painting and weathering. You can barely see the legs of the generator in this picture. The white spots, like the door handle, underneath the steps, and the corners, I touched up with the Model Air wood that I used, and also used it underneath the window in this picture. For the rust, I used light rust and just dabbed it on randomly on the generator, and I also did the 2 faces. I painted that as well with that color, as well as the chimney and the streak going below it. To get the streak, I just put a dab of paint underneath it and pulled it down with a craft swab. I also used a little bit underneath the 2 antennas as well. I also dry brushed some of that color onto some of the shingles just to help give a little bit of a color variation to it. Here are the final pictures of how the shack looks right now. I'm really happy with it. I went through with Model Air Orange Rust from Vallejo and painted some of the shingles with it. I used some of the wood color and some of a light rust wash as well to help give some variation. I also used some of that orange rust on the rust spots on the generator and on the chimney itself, just here randomly. Just for the generator itself, I used it to kind of join everything together and make it look like it was really rusty. I then also used the light rust wash to tie all the rust together, and you need to be careful with it because it did spider off, as you can see in this picture, some towards the door and some towards the generator. But overall, I'm really happy with how this turned out. I thank everybody for watching. And we'll end it with a clip of this down on the layout and a temporary home until the permanent one's built.